Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. The BBC reports that 7 weeks after Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that places heavy restrictions on outright bans on gender-affirming care in Florida, many transgender Floridians feel uncertainty and dread about their future in the state. Senate Bill 254 was signed into law on May 17th and has been criticized for its broad restrictions on health care for the estimated 94,000 trans people who live in Florida. That law has placed a ban on all gender-affirming care for minors and further limits on how transgender adults can receive care. Provisions of the bill include restrictions on the type of medical providers that are able to prescribe hormone replacement therapy, banning the use of telehealth for gender-affirming care, and the new requirement of an informed consent form, something the Florida Board of Osteopathic Medicine still has not provided. Clearly, the effect of these bans is already having serious effects on transgender patients in that their care has been just outright disrupted. J.T. Sens, a clinical psychology student and transgender man, says that he's feeling both physical and psychological effects from not being able to refill his prescription for hormone replacement therapy, which he's been taking for 4 years. Right now, being off hormones is having a huge effect. My mood is all over the place. My emotions are all over the place. As far as what it does to the body, I mean, you're thinking of taking away something that affects every part of your body. How you think affects how tired you are. Things like that. It's so dangerous, said Sens. Let's be clear, the state of Florida's action, like those in other states that have passed hate-based legislation against transgender health care, is taking people's rights away, trying to deny their ability to be who they are. In an article in USA Today, published on July 3rd, a poll shows that most transgender people living in the United States struggle to find belonging, even in their own neighborhoods. Said Rob Todaro, communications director for the Washington, D.C.-based think tank Data for Progress, it's clear that many LGBTQ+ people, particularly those who are transgender, struggle to feel a sense of belonging and don't feel comfortable expressing themselves. A separate Data for Progress survey conducted among likely voters found that LGBTQ+ voters are more dissatisfied with their mental health, standard of living, and household income compared with straight cisgender voters. I know for all you trans people out there, this is not exactly news. But it's good that these think tanks are actually paying attention to this. Obviously, affecting things like this is the trend of hateful legislation and propaganda being put forth in Republican states. Last month, the LGBTQ rights organization Human Rights Campaign issued its first emergency declaration in its 40-plus year history. The reason they did this? More than 75 anti-LGBTQ bills were already signed into law in 2023, more than doubling last year's previous record. In another story, probably falling into the "this is news" category for trans people, KSL.com, a Utah station, reports that a new study by Utah State University researchers highlights a lack of healthcare providers who are well-versed in transgender care. The study found that 1 in 4 transgender and non-binary individuals report having to teach medical providers about their healthcare needs. The study relied on data from the 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey. With over 27,700 respondents, the survey was the largest ever devoted to transgender individuals. A 2022 survey has not yet been released. One of the study authors, Guadalupe Marquez Velarde of USU's Department of Sociology and Anthropology, said the study is particularly timely given the hundreds of recent bills that transgender and non-binary individuals, particularly youth, are confronted with this year. 10 such bills, 4 of which actually passed, were introduced in Utah. The most prominent was SB 16, which made Utah the first state to ban transgender-related treatments for minors earlier this year. Said Marquez Velarde, "We want this message to get to the actual people who are going to be treating transgender and non-binary individuals. Medical students need to know about sexual and gender minorities just as they need to know about racial and ethnic minorities." Marquez Velarde's work has focused on how systems of inequality, such as racism and transphobia, impact physical and mental health outcomes. It's early days, but we find this kind of research and attention to gaps in the healthcare community's ability to provide effective care encouraging. And finally, just as we were thinking there was some momentum being gained in the federal courts when it came to the Republican-sponsored transgender healthcare bans, the Washington Post has reported on July 8th that the 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has reversed a lower federal district court's injunction that had temporarily blocked Tennessee's recently passed hate legislation, banning the provision of life-saving, gender-affirming care for minors. Quote, "This ruling is beyond disappointing and a heartbreaking development for thousands of transgender youths, their doctors, and their families," end quote. The ACLU and other advocates wrote in a joint statement, quote, "As we and our clients consider our next steps, we want all the transgender youth of Tennessee to know this fight is far from over, and we will continue to challenge this law until it is permanently defeated and Tennessee is made a safer place to raise every family." Interestingly, Chief Judge Jeffrey Sutton wrote, quote, "Life-tenured federal judges should be wary of removing a vexing and novel topic of medical debate from the ebbs and flows of democracy by construing a largely unamendable federal constitution to occupy the field," unquote. Now, there's more, and it's important to put that statement in context. Sutton was joined, in his opinion, by Judge Amul Thapar, who was appointed by former President Donald Trump, and Judge Helene White, who, like Sutton, was appointed by former President George W. Bush. They agreed that the statewide injunction was an overstep, but wrote that the Tennessee law was likely unconstitutional because it discriminates on the basis of sex.
Hello, and welcome back to Trans Truth. I am your host, Jeri Ann. Today's episode is the second in a series that we're calling Our Stories. Today I will be interviewing my co-host, Kelly Nelson. Kelly.
I knew I wasn't going to be able to escape this.
All right, Kelly, we have known each other for a very long time. But I can honestly say I don't think I know your story. You've been there with my journey and my transition, but you're still in the midst of your transition, and still on that road of self-discovery to some extent. So I'm going to be interested to hear what you have to say today. So let's just start with, let's start with the beginning.
Okay, seems like a good place to start.
What was your earliest memory of realizing you were different?
I I don't want to use the cliche. I remember it like it was yesterday, but that memory has always been very stark. Never forgot it. I must have been 4 or 5 years old, and I can't remember the scenario, but I had wet hair. I don't know if I'd been swimming and come home with a wet head, or had just had a bath or whatever. And this is, back in the old days, we had electricity, but we didn't have blow dryers. But we had hair dryers. They were two kinds. The kind with the big plastic cone head that you sat under in the beauty shop, mm-hmm. and the kind that sat on a desk and connected to a plastic bonnet with via a hose. And my mom plopped that on my head to get my hair dry. And I can't describe the feeling that came over me, but it just felt right. This is so cool. And it seems like such a goofy thing to have made me aware that I was different, but that was the point. It was that light bulb moment.
My goodness, I never knew that. All these years, I never knew that. That's so cool.
It kind of is. And we know people that have similar stories, but there's no way I could tell you why it was at that point, why it didn't happen sooner, but that was it. So you grew up in a different part of the country than I did. You grew up in the Northwest, so it's a different region. But what was the cultural environment like for you at various stages? Let's start with your young life. Yeah, actually not that much different from yours. It was the West Coast, but I grew up in a kind of a mid-sized mill town in the Pacific Northwest. So, lots of blue-collar, hard-working, redneck loggers and mill workers and stuff like that. So, yeah, there were no out gay people or transgender people or anything like that. It was, to say the least, hostile.
And so that was the culture through your growing up, say through high school.
Yeah. And speaking of high school, I can remember a couple of my classmates in my class from junior high on through high school that were always effeminate and took an unending amount of heat from their classmates, including myself, I am ashamed to say. Yep. Lost touch with them. One of them I know grew up to be a very successful aerospace engineer, but that's something I regret. Part of my treatment of them was part of the denial that I lived with for most of my life.
I think it's pretty common for trans women in their previous life to overact, and that overacting might involve overachieving too.
Oh, absolutely. I can't, I think if I remember right, when we were talking about your experience, you felt like you compensated or tried to cure yourself by getting married and hoping that love would overcome that. There was some of that in my story. I was attracted to thrill sports, an adrenaline junkie from a very young age. I remember teaching myself to climb rocks and rappel off cliffs at the age of 10 or 12. As I got older, motorsports were a big part of my life. Freestyle skiing, my peers invented freestyle skiing, I like to say. We were skiing moguls and doing backflips off jumps and stuff like that. before anybody else was. And I think, I don't want to say that was compensation, but it kind of was. It kind of made it easier to live with myself. If I can do this, then I don't feel quite as much guilt about what I considered myself then, guiltily, was a cross-dresser.
Yeah. It seems like that if you can express yourself or present yourself as extremely macho or extremely successful, then it kind of diminishes the opportunity for anybody to closely scrutinize you and maybe see through your facade.
Yeah, I think that...
Or have no reason to even think otherwise. And I think it's like a smokescreen.
I think that's true. I won't say that it was a conscious decision, but it certainly had that effect, that benefit. Yeah,
I think it's a survival tactic, unconscious survival tactic. So, in all this adrenaline rushing time, did you ever have a need to express your gender identity? And if so, how did you manage that?
Like I said, I was a cross-dresser, and it was just intermittent. I never really thought about transitioning. I think I probably considered it a time or two, and the cultural environment where I was for most of my life just meant it just couldn't happen. So what's the word? Sublimated all of those feelings, grudgingly indulged in what gender expression I could do and still live with. But it was a long time before even that much became okay, that I could say, all right, this is who I am and I accept this. And it was longer still before, I came to the realization that, I actually suffer from gender dysphoria, and that's not going away.
Yeah. When we met, you were identifying as a cross-dresser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not really comfortable at that point even. So when did you decide to go all in and begin your transition?
It came about as a result of therapy. I was dealing with a couple of different issues. Depression, which was what we thought was depression, which was manifesting as anger issues, hostility, and PTSD from my career in emergency services. 23 years as a paramedic and firefighter, you see some things that you can't ever unsee. And those were an issue too. And I didn't really know what it was. I just knew that something needed to change. So I went to counseling, sought out a counselor that was qualified to deal with gender identity issues, and had resolved up front to be very open about that. So we weren't hiding anything, wouldn't sabotage my own success there. And we started talking, and it was probably 6 months into the process before we really started to zero in on what was really going on for me. That's another moment I really remember. Yeah, I've mentioned being into motorsports and things like that, and most of my most significant heroes in motorsports were the women competitors. Going all the way back to Shirley Muldowney, the NHRA drag racing multi-time champion. But they were always women, and I mentioned that the women I worked with when I was in the Army, I was a medic in the Army, and most of the senior NCOs and nurses I worked with were Vietnam veterans. This is late 70s. And they were not just role models. They were strong and compassionate at the same time. And I always looked up to them more than anything. And I'm telling this to my therapist, and she's sitting there, and this smile starts to spread across her face, and she starts nodding, and I stopped and said, "What?" And she says, "Well, you identify with them." And that was, as they say, the watershed moment. I can't remember if it was that session or one or two later where I actually was able to refer to myself as trans, but that's how it happened.
So you did that for most of your life, like many decades.
Oh yeah, the whole purge, guilt, and then give into it again pattern over and over. Yeah, you bet.
I think that people hold off from transitioning because of fear, but sometimes they just haven't gotten to that place yet. So why did it take you so long?
Well, like I said, it was an unaccepting culture. My inability to come to grips with who I was, and my social transition is kind of plodding along, and the main reason for that is career, career and finances. I don't want to put that career at risk. I'm nearing the end of my career. I'll be retiring fairly soon. But I have a spouse that I love dearly, and I want to make sure that and I want to make sure that I'm still able to care for her and our home. I really don't care what the world thinks of me. That's not what's keeping me from it. But I just feel like I should not do anything to put my income, my career at risk at this point.
Well, you mentioned your spouse, and the next thing I was going to ask was about supportive friends or family after you have come out. So let's talk about supportive friends or family after you're coming out.
When my spouse and I first started dating, it was maybe the second or third date. When we both realized it was starting to get serious. I told her that I was a cross-dresser. My God, that was a scary moment. But I had resolved at that point to not hide that from anyone who meant that much to me ever again. And the look on her face was relief, because she was sure I was going to tell her I was an axe murderer. So that went well. And for, nearly 20 years, that's how it went. She was okay with that, but we were both, kind of ignorant of where it was going. So she knew I was in counseling, and I would give her updates on where it was headed, and told her that. When I had, had that watershed moment in therapy where I was going, and bless her heart, she had said that it would be tough for her. She didn't know how she was going to be able to do it, but she would support me as much as she could. And oh my God, she has done that. She has been unbelievably accepting and supportive.
Well, I'm going to interview her too.
Yeah.
Just saying. Saying.
You're gonna give me a big ass reality check, aren't you?
Yeah. Say what you want, but we're going to find out the truth. Yeah. We owe that to our listeners to present the truth. That's why we're here, Kelly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what have been some challenges for you? At any point, in your cross-dressing stage, in your suppression stage, your cross-dressing stage, your coming out stage, What have been some
Yeah,
challenges?
I really, not that many. When I when I set my mind to do something, I just do it. I don't let things get in my way. The big challenge I've already talked about. How it might, how I have to kind of ease into my social transition because of career concerns. But honestly, I can't think of anything that other than that is getting in my way.
Well, I have had a whole pile of challenges. Can I share some with you?
Things I'm in for? Yeah, sure.
Oh my goodness. Well, so what is your greatest source of when did you experience, say, a measure of peace or some pride or sense of accomplishment or anything like that along this journey?
There's another one of those moments that really stands out. We met getting ready for one of the girls' night out events that you were planning at the time, and it was, I don't know, it was a few months later at least. We ended up after our usual evening of having dinner and stuff, going over to one of the gay bars in Houston, and it's a big place. They got bars all over the place, and we found ourselves at one near the back of the pool room, and there was this kind of butch woman tending bar there, and I walked up to the bar, and she said, just matter of fact, "What'll it be, ladies?" And that was, to at least that point in my life, the most affirming moment I had ever had. She knew we were trans, I'm sure, but she just treated me as who I was, and that was a first for me. For a complete stranger to call me lady.
Wow. So would you do anything different if you had it to do all over again?
Oh my God. I've thought about that because I knew this question was going to come up, and I don't know that I could have. I would say I would do something different sooner, but when that would have afforded itself, I don't know. I really don't. Should have, yeah, sure. But whether I could have, either from a practical standpoint or a self-acceptance standpoint, I got nothing.
Yeah, I wish I had more life to live as myself. I would like to say I would transition sooner, but it was not even a possibility.
Sure.
Very much sooner. So, yeah, that's a tough question. What would you do differently?
I will say I have taken to heart advice that Phyllis Fry gave me once about transitioning, and she said, if you're thinking about it now, just do it. You will be happier. The rest of your life will be better. And I think that's true. Yeah, I'm tempering my response to that a bit, but I have no doubt that things will get better as I do.
Okay. Well, Kelly, is there anything else that you would like to add to your story that we've not covered?
I don't think so. I think I'd love to keep talking about it, but then I'm going to start repeating myself, and you'll repeat yourself, and I'm not a famous movie star or a rodeo captain, so there's really that's not much that's that interesting about me. So anyway, thanks for the time.
You're young yet. You're young yet.
Oh, well, bless you.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd like to repeat is to our listeners is the reason we're doing this is everyone has their own unique story, but there are some commonalities. I, for a long time, thought I was the only freak out there. And I gained a measure of peace when I discovered that there were other people like me. And so that's why we do this, to give people hope and encouragement that you're not alone. And we'll have some more interviews and a variety of interviews coming up. So to our listeners, stay tuned.
Okay.
Well, you have been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. If you are transgender yourself, you have a friend or a loved one who is transgender, or you are simply looking to understand more about the transgender experience, we hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us at info@transtruth.info. Copyright 2023 Trans Truth.